It's time to take a deep breath and quiet the mind. Every breath and thought was energy that brought us to our experience in this moment. We are going to exercise our beliefs in the possible. We will bend and create our own realities. Let's explore how to square our recovery and thrive in life. I welcome you to Recovery Squared Radio with your host, Steve Wofford.
I am here with Jacqueline Smith. I met Jacqueline at Limitless, which is a 3-day transformational seminar. And at this seminar, I was able to clear out some long-held, deeply limiting beliefs. And when I first met Jacqueline or noticed her, I was writing on a piece of wood that I was about to break that had an affirmation. It had something about creating some abundance in my life, and I had the word will. I will create this. And she tapped me on the shoulder. She's like, I want you to cross this out because will means that it's something in the future, and your creating is actually happening now. And so when I heard that, I was like, I am a huge fan of being intentional with my words, and our words are a way to program our subconscious into creating the life that we want. And when we put conditions in them, that's exactly what happens. And so I love, sometimes it's a little like, I didn't get my wording right, but I love what it does, and it creates a new way of being. So Jacqueline, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. It is amazing how much our words create our world. And I think we forget how much we program into our mind with words of the future, and we never quite reach those goals. I'm going to have, or I will, or even I can, instead of I am. And I am is way more powerful than anything in the future because it's stating who you are right now.
And so I decided to have her on the show so we can talk about this. And we're going to also talk a little bit about the trauma triangle. But first, Jacqueline, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I have an interesting life. I love my life. About 12 to 15 years ago, I began homeschooling my children. And in the process of homeschooling, I ran across human nature, that I fell in love with the study of human nature. And I began really feeling like I was living my purpose. I began studying history and politics, and I ran for Congress in Utah's 1st District for federal office. And that was just a whirlwind of fun. I felt like I had a mission, a message. It was beautiful. Then shortly after that run, I slid into a bit of a depression, and so did my husband. And between the two of us, we began living very unconsciously. We began a process where we were creating a bunch of garbage in our life rather than creating the good things that we used to create. And I didn't even realize how much my thinking was affecting my life. So at that point, I ran into this Limitless seminar that you attended, and I became deeply involved with it. And I'm now one of their facilitators and speakers, and what they lovingly call angels, where we take people through this belief breakthrough process. And so it's a powerful way to absolutely change your world and change your thinking. And even though I knew all this so well, I forgot, and I became completely unconscious to my life. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a mom. I've got 5 kids. We homeschool. I've been involved in politics, and life is good.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. So couple interesting things that you mentioned, and it kind of ties into the whole drama triangle concept that we've been talking about. And I often have been thinking about how our political system, like you want a perfect example of the drama triangle. There's always a persecutor, there's always a victim, and there's someone coming in there to be the rescuer. So I thought that was kind of funny.
That is true.
And I used to spend quite a bit of time in politics, but then it ended up taking a lot of energy, and at some point I was like, that just really doesn't serve me anymore. So I think I need to find other hobbies and other interests.
Yes, there's a lot of negative energy surrounding politics. So I don't really want to be involved in politics anymore, but I do want to educate people on freedom and liberty, because that is a beautiful thing to be for. Politics seems to be an energy of fighting, and it's not a very pretty place. And I think that's part of the reason that I began the spiral downward. I had come so engrossed in it, and I didn't even realize how much it was affecting all of my thinking.
Isn't that crazy? Because what I had noticed is it puts you in a fear state and it puts you in the victim state because you can't control, the value of the dollar, although we can complain about it a lot, but really, we can try to educate, but to me, it's a natural part of the natural order of things. And sure, when I have an opportunity to do something about it, I will, but I'm not going to drive myself crazy trying to figure it out either. But I appreciate the educational aspect of it. And I spent a little time getting educated on it. So I appreciate you doing that.
I applaud anybody that's willing to get involved. Either you're a narcissist or you truly love liberty. Those are the only two reasons I think people get involved. So, and hopefully I was, the latter.
I love that.
I want to explain, though, to your listeners, that what exactly the drama triangle is, though, because, we've thrown out some words and maybe people don't understand what that really is. So, all right, well, let's just, if you're driving and you're listening to this, don't do this in the car. If you're home and you've got a piece of paper and a pencil in front of you, just draw a triangle with the tip down. And that is the drama triangle. And so the bottom point would be the victim. That's the person who's at the bottom. They're the ones that, it's not their fault. It's never their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. That's the victim standpoint. In the drama triangle, there's also always, we call them a villain, but in the original drama triangle by Cartman, they call him a persecutor. Either name works. The villain is often perceived. They're not even really the villain. They're just the perceived villain in your mind. You believe they're the ones doing this to you. Like you said, the government doing this to you. Like it's not the fault of you. It's the government's fault. And so they're the villain. Then the other side of the triangle would be your rescuer. And that's the people that they pretend like they're coming in to rescue, but they really are holding the victim in that victim standpoint and that victimhood place in their mind, saying this isn't your fault. This is somebody else's fault. They shouldn't be doing this to you. Whatever that situation is, you can feel it very strongly. They're actually holding the victim in their victimhood.
I love that. So we have these three roles. Generally, what are the symptoms that you see to identify when you're in that role? Like, how do you know you're in a victim or a persecutor role or that you're in that drama triangle? What are some of the symptoms of that?
I'm going to explain this really quickly with a little story, if you don't mind, because this is how quickly the drama triangle can show up in your life and you realize that you're participating. My kids had braces and I took them in to get their braces tightened. And afterwards, we went to a little store for a smoothie. And when we got there, my son said, well, I don't want anything. I said, fine, you don't have to get anything. And he's like, well, I think there's sugar in the smoothie. And I said, well, there is, but it's all natural sugar. You can have it. He was on one of those no sugar kicks. It was interesting because I didn't really think much of it, but he decided not to get anything. We got in the car and I announced to my children that we were going to go visit their grandmother. This child that refused the smoothie immediately was angry. It's not, I'm hungry. We have to go straight home. And it was this big, huge, blow up. Well, he was choosing the victim right then. The victim always starts the drama. That sounds counterintuitive to what you would think. You think, well, no, doesn't the villain start it? No, the victim almost always starts the drama. And I'll get into this a little bit more so that people don't feel like I'm just saying it's always the victim's fault, because I don't believe that. But the victim starts the drama of it. So he chooses victim, who's his villain. Well, I am, because I told him we're going to grandma's house and we're not stopping for something else. And he's mad they didn't get any food. Well, I didn't have to step into that role as villain. I could have just said, well, it's your choice. And, that's how it goes. And you'll just have to suffer the consequence. But I didn't. It was amazing how quickly I let things get out of hand. So what happened was I said, well, we already gave you a chance and you chose not to get something to eat. But then he got indignant. It was like, but I thought you were lying to me about the sugar. Well, something in my head switched and I was furious. And I know that moms and dads out there, when you're dealing with kids, know what this feels like. Then I stepped into the role of villain. So before I was just a perceived villain. But now I'm stepping into it and I'm mad and I'm angry and I'm saying things like, I'm done. I've had it with you. I've got all these words spewing out of my mouth out of anger, not out of a conscious choice, but out of a reaction. So now I'm the villain. I've completely stepped into the villain role. Immediately after that, I had another child in the car who was saying things like, Mom, stop being mad. It's not his fault. He didn't understand. He didn't know. So the rescuer entered the triangle. trying to protect the victim from big bad villain. So you can see how these roles happen in an instant, and a small thing can become a giant amount of drama. I mean, we're getting smoothies, for crying out loud. How big of a drama is that? It's not, but it turned into it because I was behaving unconsciously. One child's choosing victim and another child's choosing rescuer. And we've got drama in the car, at huge decibels that you wouldn't even expect. It just changed everything so quickly. I mean, that's just a really simple story, but that shows you how easily those participants can choose in.
Yeah, that's powerful. It comes in and can kind of sneak up on you. It's not always obvious. And at least the way I know that I'm stepping into it is that there's some sort of anxiety.
Right. Upset, anxiety, frustration. That's how you know that you're stepping into it. And it's interesting because I also have how you change it and how you flip that triangle and how you choose out of that situation. And we can get into that in a minute. But the other thing that I wanted to mention about the drama triangle specifically is these roles move around. Once you've chosen in, then you start moving around the triangle and you just play a different role the whole time. I see this a lot with marriages.
Well, the persecutor gets persecuted.
Right.
Right. And then he persecutes the victim as a way of getting back. And then each person has, like my rescuer was a drugs a lot of times.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, I'm sure you do too. There's probably a ton of stories that you can come up with in your mind. And I think if the listeners are thinking about this, they're thinking, ooh, I remember when I did that. I remember when I stepped into villain. And ooh, I remember when I stepped into victim. And oh, I've tried to play the rescuer too. The rescuer thinks they're doing good, feeling good, and they're trying to help, but it's not really helpful. It's usually just more of the same drama. It just perpetuates that victimhood cycle. So I mentioned that the victim controls the drama triangle. And the reason I said that, and that's kind of a hard pill to swallow for some people, because there are people out there who've been, physically abused, maybe they've been sexually abused, or maybe they've been robbed, or a myriad of things could have happened to them. They didn't choose for those things to happen to them. And some people may argue that they did, but the thing is, there's agency out there and other people can do things to us, and we can't help that from happening. But what we can do is choose to step out of victimhood. So once it's over, it's in the past. It's how long we hold on to that victimhood and carry it with us into the future that we stay the victim. And I think that's a really important thing to realize. I was a victim, but I am no longer the victim. I'm stepping out of victimhood and I'm choosing to take control of my life. That's a really important concept for people to recognize when they're looking at this whole drama triangle, because if it happened in the past, it's over. And that's what you need to remember. It's in the past. That perpetrator is still not doing that to you.
Because this can be kind of confusing because, like in my marriage or my old marriage, a lot of times I felt boxed in, right? Like, why do you always do this? And then I would get mad. So even though I'm kind of the persecutor or feeling, in order for me to really become the persecutor, I have to say I'm a victim, right? Because then I'm going to be the persecutor and lash out, right? So it's kind of interesting. And sometimes you can really get nuanced into these different roles that we play because they can change within an instant. Because someone says something to you, you perceive it as like, hey, they're trying to put me in a box where there's no right answer. And so I can get mad and lash out. Right. And then I really am. Then I step into that role. I also have the choice to create something. But I'm wondering, why do you think persecutors choose in to that role? Like, there's got to be some underlying reason why they step into that role.
Yeah. When you're a victim or when you're choosing into victimhood and you create the villain, and I see this a lot in marriages. So let me just give you an example, and then I think I can answer that clearly. A wife is feeling like maybe her husband won't let her do certain things or something, So she's feeling like, oh, there's never enough money. I don't feel like I can go be with my friends. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just using a really benign example. But they feel like they're the victim. And who's the villain? Their husband. But their husband doesn't even know they're the villain. They can feel something's off. They can feel they're upset or frustrated, but they don't know even why. So they're a perceived villain, but they haven't actually stepped into that role. But then if a wife goes and she's complaining, I don't feel like I have this or that, he may become frustrated that she's complaining. And at first, he'll step into the villain role. And usually the language behind that is, I'm right. So villains often have the I'm right thought process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right, you're wrong, this is your problem, this is your fault. That's the language a villain has in their mind when they step into that role. But then later, I watch the husband feel bad about the complaint after he's, had language with her about, well, this is your own problem, this isn't my fault, this is your fault, or whatever. Then he feels bad. So then he moves over to rescue her instantly. He tries to rescue her. Well, if we're going to have to figure something else out, and, maybe we can figure out a way to, it's not your fault, it's mine. And then they totally feel bad. So they try to rescue. So they're playing two roles in a marriage. But who started it? You have to go back to who started it. The person who chooses to feel victimized. They always begin the drama.
Yeah, I love that. I know that this could be a whole nother show, but when you're describing these things, you almost summarized my entire marriage for 2 decades. But what I realized, and this took me a long time to realize, the reason that I actually stepped into that is because I felt judged, because I judged myself. And I didn't want anyone else judging me because there's really I can't stand on my own, right? Since I'm not accepting of myself. And if I'm using something outside of myself for me to be accepted, it did not make me feel good. And that's why I had to run to some sort of rescue. I was either in, I need to fight or I need to rescue, persecutor, villain, or rescuer. So when you're in this, I know that oftentimes I could sense the anxiety. So what's the process in transcending this into creating?
Okay, so the first thing is, if you're playing rescuer, lots of times people who are, I'm going to start with that one first, because people who are healers, people who really want to help, they try to go into this rescue. And I like to use the word enabler. I really call them an enabler. So it doesn't correct the behavior. It doesn't change the person. It just kind of enables their bad behavior. And they get this pity party going. So this enabler role, you have to transcend that by choosing not to engage in the victimhood with the victim. And lots of times rescuers don't know how to do that. So they just have to step away from it for a while. But what the victim needs is a mentor. They need to have somebody that can mentor them through the process and take them out of victimhood. So they need somebody who's not going to hold them down there and say, yep, it's not your fault. They're going to say, hey, get accountable. It's time for you to look at how you helped create this. It's time for you to look at how you can transcend that. So that's one of the first things. The rescuer has to just stop rescuing. They can mentor somebody, but they cannot rescue. So that's the first thing. On the persecutor or villain side of things, simply let go of their need to be right. It's okay. If somebody's choosing to feel like a victim, that's fine. That's their choice. They don't have to be right about it. They don't have to make them wrong or try to tell them that it's their fault. They just need to stop engaging in that process. That doesn't mean the person who's playing the victim isn't still going to see them as that villain. They probably actually still will see them as that villain, but it won't necessarily be in the same energy. They won't have to step into the drama with them. That victim may still totally say, yep, it's still your fault. You did this to me. And they just simply say, however you want to see it. So they have to transcend it by just literally not participating in the drama.
And that can be hard to do because when you're stuck in that, you have these behaviors, neural pathways, ways of being, this dynamic in a relationship. And I loved what you said. The first thing you said to transcend that is you need that mentor.
Right.
And this takes me back, probably the most powerful life-altering use of this technique that literally this podcast happened because of all this. And that's how powerful this stuff is that when I first entered in recovery, and thank God I had that in some of these tools because that was the mentor that was like, what you were living in, Steve, is that really what you're trying to create? You got involved in recovery. You're doing all this personal development. Is this what you're trying to create? I didn't know it at the time. It took me about a year to figure out before I learned about the drama triangle. But what the drama triangle did is it summarized everything that I was doing into 6 specific roles. So that way, when something happens that I don't like, I reprogrammed my subconscious to be like, hey, well, what are we going to create out of this?
Right. Well, and that's the biggest key is to see which role you're playing. As soon as you know which role you're playing, choose the other role, choose the opposite role. So if you're playing rescuer, choose mentor or help the victim find a mentor. It doesn't have to be you. If you're choosing villain, just step out of it and recognize that you may be a teacher for that person, but you don't necessarily have to do anything to engage in that teaching. That's something for them to figure out. So the villain becomes the victim's teacher, or the situation becomes the teacher. And recognizing that that doesn't have to be in a villain standpoint. There's something they need to learn. I'm going to allow them to have that learning experience, and I don't have to participate in the drama is a huge step in changing things around. But the person who really controls it, again, is the victim. The victim has to decide right off the bat, I am done being a victim. I am done blaming other people or other situations for where I stand. I get to be accountable and look at my life from an accountable, creative perspective. And they become the hero in their life, or the victor. So the villain moves to victor. And so if you actually take this triangle and you just flip it on its head, and you get the victor at the top now, being held up by a mentor and a teacher, that's where freedom exists. That's where creation happens, is when there is no drama anymore. The drama is completely gone, and the victim has switched to victor and hero, and they've totally taken over their lives, and they're responsible, and they're creating again. It's an amazing piece of freedom and peace. It brings so much peace into somebody's life when they choose that way.
I love that. I know that for me, like this, following this method is life changing. I know I can name so many different ways that, I mean, really, it's a guide to all relationships in reality.
It is business, family, marriages, even like you said, even with the government, you can choose not to be the victim anymore.
One of the things I often say is that when I judge the people that I allow into, especially like my inner circle, what are we co-creating together? Mm-hmm. And even my professional coaches that I hire, we're still co-creating something. Either I'm helping them with my business, or our roles are reversed sometimes. And it's just an interesting dynamic, and it's freedom, and I love it. Are you familiar with dynamic tension?
I am not.
Let me explain it. This is from TED Empowerment, and it's identical to what you're saying, but they have another term. It was called dynamic tension. And the best way I can explain this is when I was in my marriage, I was labeled a persecutor, and I was trying to, I was in this place. It's hard just to get up and leave when you have kids and stuff, but it creates this tension to where you're like, this is no longer serving. This is no longer serving. You can have that freedom in some level, but sometimes when you're stuck in this relationship, it can be hard to just automatically reverse it when maybe only one person's trying. And so, especially when you have a lot of emotional baggage. And so the dynamic tension, what that says is that basically you use that tension is energy to go seek out alternative ways, whether it's to stepping out to go find a mentor, or even this podcast was created out of that tension of that I wanted answers. I was done being a victim to how people wanted me to be. And so the very idea about this podcast is to put more solutions out there that are not stuck to any kind of dogma or specific ways or organizations, to create a little bit more freedom of choice on, hey, I want this to work for me and that to work for me, and kind of create my own. Because I really found, to have that ownership is where, whatever you believe in is what it's going to work, is what it comes down to.
And that belief breakthrough process that we talked about at the beginning with the limitless is a great way to understand why you keep choosing victim or why you keep choosing into villain. There is something that you believe about yourself that your subconscious mind has created that continually replays that idea over and over and over in your mind, so that you have to create that, because that has to be true for you to make your world right. And your subconscious mind believes something that's causing you to create those situations.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for talking about this. Like I said before, the creator role is something I try to live in. And then also my coaching is about empowering other people to be able to create and to step into their creator role. So thank you so much for being on the show. And why don't you tell our listeners a little about where they can find out more about you and any products or services that you want to share with them?
Okay, absolutely. My website is mentoringforme.com, and I have myself and a couple other mentors on that site, and we do belief breakthrough and we do some life coaching. And I also have an audio CD on the drama triangle. It's from Drama to Freedom. And it's really learning more about those roles and how they play out and how you can make it big changes in your life through belief breakthrough and through recognizing the role you're playing. So you can contact me there. I'm also on Facebook. Jacqueline Smith is my name. And I would love to get to know you. And I have a public page that you can like and keep abreast of what we've got going on in the world.
That's awesome. Well, I can tell you guys, Jacqueline, she's a real deal. She impressed me quite a bit, and I appreciate what she's doing. Very inspiring, and it's helped me personally. So, Jacqueline, if there's anything I can do to support you, I'm there with you, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the time you've given me, and I know that there are a lot of people really stuck, and it's just time to help them wake up, become conscious of how they can create in their lives.
I love it. Thanks again.
I want to thank Jacqueline for coming on the show with me to talk about the drama triangle. I've got to say the drama triangle is one of my favorite tools that I use not only in my life, but also in my coaching. And I encourage you to reach out to Jacqueline if you feel in alignment and checking her stuff out. I also want to share with you a recent experience I had with the drama triangle. As you might know, I've spent the last 2 years going through a divorce, and it was just finalized just about a week ago. And through this 2 years, I kept asking myself, what do I want to create? In the beginning, I was dealing with a marriage that wasn't serving me in the life that I wanted to create, and it trapped me in the victim persecutor mode. I was primarily the persecutor. And I was very idealistic, and so like Jacqueline shared in the show that I'm right. There was quite a bit of that. And instead of asking today if I'm right or wrong, I just say, is this the life that I want to create? And initially it started off by leaving. I want to create a better life for my boys. It doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong in this argument, fight, or what have you. This isn't the life that I want to create any longer. And then even going through the divorce process, there's always someone that has to be right, so therefore there's always a persecutor, and there's also always a victim. And the court system loves to make victims and persecutors, and they're the rescuer. And so they further fuel the whole drama triangle. And so even during that process, I just simply told myself the outcome does not matter, but what do I want to create? And so in many ways, the system, it's almost impossible to quote unquote win or be right because the system's just not set up that way. The legal system is far from ideal, and it's beyond the point of even wanting to judge it. And so I just asked myself, what do I want to create during this process? And I had to think long and hard about my long-term goals. And my long-term goals are that I want to take me and my boys around the world. And so instead of playing into the system how it wants me to play on a very local level, I'm thinking more globally and bigger visions. And even some of the expert witnesses just don't see my bigger, larger vision. But it reminded me of back when I was in school sitting at a desk, Steve, this is how it's done. You need to ask, you need to do the schoolwork that we say, and this is how you go get the jobs that we create. This is how it's done, Steve. But I think in terms of my global vision, changing thousands of people's lives, it was interesting. One of the things the evaluator stated was that I had grandiose thinking and that was typical of people with addictions. And now it would be easy for me to step into the victim role. She's persecuting me. She's wrong. Instead, I just observe it and I realize my place in the world. That's how most people think. That you can't make a difference. And the problem is that many of us can't make a difference in our own lives, so how are we going to make a difference in other people's lives? since I've made such a powerful difference in my own life, I can make an even bigger difference in other people's lives because I have the path to lead many people through what I've already been through, leading people through my path of transformation. And now the stuff that we're talking about is very serious because this stuff that we talked about on the show at Jacqueline is life-changing content. You learn to use these principles, it can change your life. And it's even more powerful when you have people like Jacqueline or people like me that help you guide you through some of these things. Now, if you're ready to step out of the drama in your life and make powerful changes in your life, I want to hear from you. Email me at steve@recoverysquared.com. I know what it's like to live under the grips of the drama triangle. It's where a lot of the addictions, depression, even disease, different disorders exist. Anytime you have anxiety in your life, that means you're living in the drama triangle. There is a way out. So if you're ready for a change in your life, shoot me an email at steve@recoverysquared.com. I'd love to talk to you. And also, if you have a chance, visit recoverysquared.com and click on the Get Access Now button, and I'll send you the Recovery Squared Belief Guide in Living Your Infinite Potential. And I'll also give you access to the private Facebook group that I've created. I love you, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Recovery Squared Radio. Please visit recoverysquared.com for access to resources on squaring your recovery. And as a reminder, act without doing. Create space between your thoughts and actions.